My brother Sean Ryan was wrongfully convicted in 1984. While serving time at Auburn Correctional Facility, he was charged with an arson murder of another inmate, Paul Carbonaro, and the late Peter Corning, each of whom have a very long history of wrongful convictions and misconduct. Their misconduct had several overturned convictions. A few years later, now Peter Corning was sitting on the bench as a Supreme Court judge, and Paul Carbonaro was the new DA. There are many more individuals who are still in prison today, including my brother, who were maliciously prosecuted by these individuals. The aforementioned officials coerced, threatened, and bribed jailhouse informants to commit perjury against my brother. There is substantial evidence to support these claims. My brother, Sean Ryan, and his case and his wrongful conviction is the catalyst to pros and cons. Hello, and welcome to Pros and Cons, a discussion about the criminal justice system and where we may be able to impact in positive ways, and also the negative impacts that it has had on our lives and our loved ones. Today, I have two special guests. The first, Terrence Coffee, and he's a criminal justice advocate, as well as an adjunct lecturer at NYU. And we have attorney Oscar Michelen. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome. It's great
to be here. Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. So, Terrence, I'd like to start with you. Can you explain a little bit about your background and your own personal experience with our criminal justice system?
Yes, absolutely. Heather, I want to thank you and James and Early Talk for having me here to share with you guys. To be perfectly honest with you, my experience with the criminal justice system and my work within the criminal justice system actually started while incarcerated at Gainesville Correctional Institution. I spent over 19 years of my life in and out of the prison system. I was one of the young Black men that Hillary Clinton referred to as a super predator. I was from those communities that were over policed, that were discriminatorily targeted during the so-called war on drugs. And it was during my years, those last years of being incarcerated, that I was involved. I got involved with the educational program that gave me an opportunity to get my GED, and I thought it was the greatest feat in the world. And not to exhaust this conversation too much, but it was there that I began to understand the impact of what we were discussing earlier, the 94 crime bill, because I didn't know. I thought the highlight, of life was to, somehow you get a high school diploma, and I had sold drugs. I had lived that life. So I was, and I remember getting out and began to try to start this new way of living and the opportunities, all that second chance stuff they were talking about. And I remember going to job interviews, and they were no longer asking me if I had a high school diploma or if I had this or that. The first questions employers began to ask were, have you ever been incarcerated? Mm-hmm. And they didn't prepare us for that, but that became a trend in my life. And it also became a trend in countless other young Black men's lives who were involved with the criminal justice system. And that's where I began to get a deeper understanding of what took place with, what was taking place in 94 crime bill and the impact. From there, I got involved with the program here in New York. I ended up scoring out pretty good on certain tests, and I ended up with a scholarship to New York University, where I earned my undergraduate and graduate degree, and I was later asked to teach a course in forensic justice and problem solving course. So I spent a lot of my time advocating on behalf of those with justice involvement, particularly in the area of educational opportunities. So I'll stop there now.
Beautiful. So to put it mildly, you were dealt quite a few obstacles in life. starting with the community where where you were raised and where you lived. So you were impacted in that sense initially, over policing,
Mhm.
incarceration, which is almost a rite of passage in many communities, especially poor communities, communities of color. And then what I'm finding very interesting is, and I'll ask you this: do you think, had you not followed this path, being involved as an advocate in the criminal justice system, do you think that you would have as successful a career in any other area?
No, no, and I'm not saying that because of me in particular. While at NYU, I did my internship at McSilver Institute, and I really studied the data and research surrounding individuals such as myself who come from these challenging communities and backgrounds. To be perfectly honest, outside of the external challenges, outside of an individual or community. One of the things, I'm reading a book by James Baldwin,
Mm-hmm.
Fire Next Time. And James Baldwin speaks about how society treats segments of our societies. And, when we say, I try to be politically correct, say segments, but we're talking about poor black and brown
Absolutely.
communities. So
Yeah.
let's just
Let's be
clear that
clear.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's at a point where the realities of society is internalized by the individual, so you no longer need that individual to try for anything or to engross himself in these ideas of education is going to, when they say education is the key to tomorrow's futures. I read Malcolm X, and I believe, so those ideas, and particularly the policies that began to govern the criminal justice system began to restrict the opportunities for young black and brown men across this country. And one of the things I'm clear on, and I want to make very clear, it wasn't just the criminal justice system. We have to understand that some of the issues we talk about when we talk about voting rights, educational rights, housing rights, all these other rights, uh, these were issues for Black America long before the criminal justice
Absolutely.
system. So
Exactly.
I only see the criminal justice system as a way for society to, as a continuation of those
To
oppressive
perpetuate that,
practices,
correct?
to perpetuate the same cycle of oppression. And Michelle Alexander highlighted that very well in her book, in the New Jim Crow, and she
Mm-hmm.
gave a detailed and chronological step of the conversations that we have. So I do involve myself in these conversations, but I make it very clear to audiences, and also to your audiences, let's not use the criminal justice system as a scapegoat for the racism that's the underbelly of the United States of America, because outside of the criminal justice system, we can look at issues of young black men who were sitting in Starbucks and see racism. We can look at the young black woman, people trying to get the Airbnb, if we want to do that. We can look at Becky in the park calling on the black man, white. We can go down a list of other things outside. I think that through the criminal justice system, it provides us a lens to have a conversation that it's just more prevalent. We can just
Right.
see it in that sense, so to speak.
Yeah. It's like a cog in the wheel
Yeah.
of this massive machine that was
Yes. Exactly.
designed to
Yes.
oppress from the
And,
beginning.
and I always tell people when I speak that for poor black and brown communities, the criminal justice system and penal systems across this country, they're only an extension of the communities in which we live.
Mm-hmm.
It was the same type of. It was just some say the rite of passage. It was just an extension of the communities in which we live. It's like you just make this circle
Yeah.
around, and you go from one poverty-stricken community to a government facility as just as oppressive, and they take you from that oppressive community and put you back in the same community that which you
Right.
came from, and now that is compounded
Mm-hmm.
by the incarceration. So it's a continuation of the cycle.
Right. And now I know before the show, part of the discussion was the parties and being either conservative or liberal, and how the two or representatives of either side can sell us something that we want, but on both sides they're actually contributing to this as well, no matter what they're selling. So let's say we'll just do Republican and Democrat for now, because that's pretty much what we're sold. And then it's the lesser of two evils from there. But Republican, we all know what has happened with the previous administration. I won't even get into too many details with that, because we've seen the ugliness come and rear its head like we haven't seen up front in many, many years, which I can actually appreciate, as much as it hurts, as much as it does damage. At least we're seeing it on that side. But then we have, on the other hand, we have Democrats where they want to provide and provide and provide for communities of color, and individuals, and it's almost creating a dependency upon that same system.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you have anything to add to either of those two.
Well, let me say this and I, for folks where I come from, white folks is white folks where I come from. What you're talking about, and for us is that paternalistic thing that the liberal and the left has brought, and how the African American is perceived as still childlike. They need and let me make clear on this, because sometimes my words get twisted. I think that there's a social contract that was broken by America to Black and brown communities. Let's just clear that up, because the contract included in our Constitution that all men are created equal, that we all have the right to life and prosperity, and all these beautiful words. But for Black and brown communities, we know it's hypocrisy, because we lived it and we've seen it for what it is. Now, in regards to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, in my opinion, and as I've always shared, a bird has two wings in order for it to fly. Just take that for what it is.
That's right.
So the Democratic Party has done more harm to the Black communities as I see the Republicans. And for me, particularly in the era I'm speaking of, it was through the Democratic Party that we saw the birth of the 94 crime bill. It was through the Democratic Party politicizing crime in America and using the Black community as the scapegoat in order to peddle their whatever.
Right.
Now,
And
it's something you said. I like the devil I know than the one I can't see. See, I can deal with what I know and see. Right. I know what the Republican Party is, but it's the one that shakes the hand and got the axe behind their back and they swing it. So for the Black community, in every election, in every scope of this society, you're absolutely right. We deal with the idea of the lesser of two evils. In this last administration, for the Black community, what's the lesser of two evils for us? I support the Biden-Harris administration, as I shared earlier, but as we also discussed, and I'm sure Oscar agreed, for the Biden and Harris administration, there are some things that needed to be discussed based upon some of the very policies Kamala Harris introduced as Attorney General in California.
Yes.
We can go back to 1994 on Congress floor when we heard now President Joe Biden give a scathing report on Black and brown communities when we were referred to as hoodlums and all these other derogatory statements. Our communities at that point in time were demonized. Mm-hmm. We were no longer seen as humans or young black males, because I think Joe Biden said he didn't care what communities we came from. We came from broken homes. If we did all this, I don't want him to come up and hit your mom or my mom. As soon as he said your mom and my mom, we knew who he was talking about.
Right.
The line was drawn for black and brown communities. And I'm not saying this I don't say nothing from some off-wall. We were in those projects, in those underfunded, underprivileged communities. We saw what the funding for militarizing police looked like in our communities. We saw the incarceration rate of 85%, where the federal government gave 80 block grants to states to reflect federal guidelines of the 85%. So it was a lived experience. So for a lot of African Americans, do we still have hope in the Democratic Party? Yeah, I'm going to say yes. I still have hope that, particularly in our day and age right now, there are a lot of progressive conversations that are taking place. There are a lot of progressive policies that are being introduced. I was speaking, I visited Fordham University yesterday for the innovation in progressive prosecuting, and there were some dynamic things being said, because until we begin to address our society in the mindset of equity and equality, we will continue to perpetuate the cycle of what we're seeing today. And I'm sure Oscar would agree with me.
Yeah. And so, Oscar, I'd like to ask you now, as an attorney, what has been your observation, your direct observation, as to the criminalization of lifestyle choices for those who are impoverished or people of color?
Well, let me start by following up on what Terrence said, because I didn't do state prison. I was able to dodge that bullet, but I'm a Dominican immigrant, came into the country, in the 1960s. My parents landed. We ended up in the Bronx in the 70s. So you just gotta look up the Bronx in the 70s and see what it was like. And there was really very few choices. So what happened now in my life is, I caught a couple of scrapes, visited an island in the middle of the water in New York City for a little bit. But it was because my parents were able to put money together and buy a house, in the projects, that made a change. And it gave us and my brothers and everybody else a different opportunity. And because my last name is Michelen, which is a French name, a lot of Dominicans have French last names, they sold us that house, where if my name was Perez or Rodriguez or Santiago, I wouldn't have been my father would not have been able to buy that house. And, and then I was always just someone who, kind of fought back, tilted at windmills and things of that nature. Even in high school, I was getting petitions for one thing, or another, and decided to pursue a career in the law. And, graduated top of my class at New York Law School, an adjunct professor at New York Law School and at Touro Law School. And, social justice was, after education, my father and mother, social justice was everything. And one of the things that's important, to back off what we spoke about with Terrence, is, the Republican and Democratic parties, and I'm a loyal Democrat, but are really two sides of the same coin. We don't have a workers' party here in the United States. We're the only democratized nation without a labor party. We can't get the working families party to have really get off the ground because of the way the structure is right. built. So that means that each of them needs each other, the Democrats and the Republicans, to kind of play along a little bit. And they're worried about their own survival rather than about the parties they represent. But that being said, like Terrence said, we have to acknowledge at least one party cares a little bit more about representation and equality, and we have to acknowledge that. I always joke, though, this last election cycle, when they said, "Oh, the party is going all the way to the left," And I'm like, did you see that we nominated Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
Right.
All the way to the left of what?
Right. If you look at their track records.
Yeah,
Right.
we're all the way to the left of the Republican Party, maybe. But we had the best slate of progressive candidates this election cycle. And we ended up with, my great grandfather and my auntie. I mean, these are not people who had progressive ideals ever.
Right. Playing it safe.
The only time they get progressive is when they feel the tide of change, which is what is happening. That's really the only reason, and it's getting better. I mean, I see what happens in Georgia. We have people like Stacey Abrams. Here in New York, we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who not only won her district, which is the district I grew up in the Bronx. She was so popular. She is the first person to ever win 2 congressional districts in the same race. Okay, people liked her message so much that in the neighboring congressional district, they wrote her in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful.
What does that mean? That the progressive ideas are the core of this country and what people want, So the criminal justice system is just the last vestige, the biggest vestige of the, of slavery and of colonialism. That's just a fact, and it's always been that way. We talked. You talked about the new Jim Crow, but the same. If you've seen Ava DuVernay's film 13th, I mean, it lays it out. So this might interest you also for this group, because I'm developing a new course for Touro Law School called The Color of Law, which examines how it was government-led segregation that caused. Government-led regulations that cause the segregation that we have today. It's not by accident; it is by design. So we go back to 1877 when I didn't know this until I researched this class, but in 1877, the Republicans, who were led by Lincoln at that time, the party of Lincoln at that time, passed a Civil Rights Act that prohibited discrimination on the basis of race. It was basically solved. It was like, okay, we made a mistake. Here's a law that says you can't discriminate against people because of race in any way. Okay. The Supreme Court struck it down less than 18 months later, saying you can't restrict property rights. And from there on in, the struggle has been to get back to something even close to what was done in 1877. So the criminal justice system is a very convenient way to exert control over, minority populations. It even goes to, and my class will discuss this. Where do they put the criminal courts? They don't put them on Fifth Avenue, right? They're always important.
They're not in the suburbs.
They're put right, almost like to say, hey, we don't want you to walk too far, So here's where you're gonna end up, and so. It's a message that is repeated in a variety of ways. And, it starts with, for example, the system of fines that had to be worked off. It goes into, it leads next into the prison complex, the actual design to replace slave labor with prison labor. And so that kind of is really the root of a lot of what we're seeing now. And then the second part of it is the control of property, where you can live. So, for example, Terrence grew up in the projects, but when that project was built, they also built public housing for white families that were single and 2-family homes. Okay, and they were restricted. Right. So even the public housing, this is where we talk about the handout, so to speak, being like, okay, thanks. Even that was different, because now when you build projects and you've got, people packing into apartments, that increases the people in the schools. It makes it harder to educate that group. It obviously, packing everybody into a building is very different than if you have, everybody's got their own space and has their own home.
It's a cattle drive.
And so it's a cattle drive. It's done, we're going to keep them here. And then of course they're over policed.
Of course.
Okay. So the most important thing, I think, is for folks that, who have not been impacted by it. That's the hard part. Like, in this conversation, we're preaching to the choir.
Right.
But it's trying to wake up folks, to say this is not by accident. This is by design.
Correct.
So the only way to really change it is a systemic change.
Right.
Putting a Band-Aid on it is going to help that one person. But the first step, it's like any other addiction. The first step is recognize you have a problem and saying it publicly. What Joe Biden should do is get up there and say, hello, my name is Joe. I was addicted to incarceration. Okay. And I'm sorry. And I was wrong. And it was a mistake, and we're going to fix it. And you may not like it, but it's the right thing to do. And the same with the vice president. But it has to be an acknowledgement that it's been a systemic problem in our country that was aided. That we can't discount that 94 crime bill. We cannot discount the turning point that was, because guess what? That meant both sides were on that side. That's what really changed things. And Clinton was so concerned about showing that, he could bring everybody together. He wanted to triangulate, want to be bipartisan. He kept giving up certain ideals to try to, show that he wasn't as left as he could. And maybe he had to do that because he came from Arkansas. Right. Maybe that worked in the state of Arkansas. But it punished the country when he did it nationally, because it's so hard we're still seeing the vestiges of that. We're still facing people who are facing that. Here's a perfect example. We're just going to legalize marijuana in New York, right? Now, I've been a practicing criminal defense lawyer for 30 years. I mean, what about those folks? I mean, what about all those people I represent who went away? Like, what? We're just going to say, oh, my bad. I'm sorry about that. That was this is like prohibition that went on for 20 years. Right. The alcohol prohibition went on for a couple of years here. Okay. Marijuana prohibition, drug crime prohibition has gone for decades.
There was a war on drugs, literally. And it was a war on people.
It was and even that, of course, was differently policed in different neighborhoods. And if you did powder cocaine, the federal law didn't apply to you the same way you did crack cocaine. So even that, there's levels upon the levels. But the important thing is that we can't act like just saying it is enough. There has to be something that has to be done. So, for example, making sure that these licenses that go out now for sale of marijuana here in New York, go to communities of color. Don't go to big business. Don't are thoughtfully distributed to try and bring some reparations. Have some of that tax money that's going to come in from that. What are they going to do with that? Where should that go? That should go to the communities that were impacted. Okay, that shouldn't go to suburban schools. That should go to city schools. That should go to city neighborhoods, and make an impact where these laws for 20 years have decimated generations of people and family. And I can tell you from representing people, when an 18-year-old kid gets arrested, and I would go to court with them, his parents were there, his grandmother was there, his aunt. It doesn't just impact that individual. It changes the course of life of so many people who get invested in that. And so I think, it's important to have these discussions. I think it's great. And I think people, need to educate themselves about the impact of all these things that we're talking about. So first of all, we don't repeat these mistakes.
Right.
The next time something comes down the road. And secondly, we can fix the mistakes that we've made over these past 20, 25 years.
So continuing on our discussion about, the criminal justice system and what drives it and who it's impacting, and, the representatives who are voted in, elected to represent a certain sect or, even the entire country. In some cases, they don't always represent everyone. But I wanted to discuss the importance of voting and voting for the right representatives. And one person who has gotten my attention lately is a young woman in New York City, and her name is Tahani Abushi. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with her. She's running for district attorney, and I believe she's a very progressive thinker. She's very outspoken. She's a very logical person, in my opinion. And I was just wondering if either of you have heard of her or have any opinions about her campaign right now.
Yeah, and my mother has some Palestinian blood in her, to say at least. So that I know Tahani Abushi from that. It's a big, wide open race for Manhattan DA here, and there's a big candidacy. There's about 8 or 9 people who are running. Tahani's an excellent progressive candidate for sure, and we've had progressive DAs. Larry Krasner in Philadelphia was elected DA of Philadelphia, having never been a DA. Has only been a defense attorney, So I think that's an area that we really need. Manhattan is a very, very old school prosecutor's office. I've exonerated 7 men in the last 12 years for murders that they didn't commit.
Wow.
And we have presented a couple of cases to the Manhattan DA's office where, it's like banging your head against the wall. We just recently filed a motion to try to overturn a conviction because the DA there is not really interested. They have a conviction review unit that's one DA strong, just one guy. He's been there 25 years. And when I presented this one case to him, he said, "Well, I knew that prosecutor. He would never do anything, untoward." And I'm like, "You're in the wrong seat if that's your thought. You may not. Right. You should not do his job. If you're saying this guy and it couldn't have happened, would I have affidavits that it did?" That's
the rubber stamp.
Exactly. So I'm hoping that look what Eric Gonzalez did there, and for him, my friend Ken Thompson, who I knew personally and started the first real wrongful conviction unit. And I know that Terrence wants to chime in on that too. But we need fresh blood in Manhattan. We need somebody progressive in Manhattan. I would love it to see beat Tahani Abushi, but there's other good candidates. But she's certainly someone to keep an eye on for sure.
Okay.
Terrence, what do you think about that race?
Yeah, Oscar, thank you so much. Yeah, and I've been following the DA's races here, and you're right, that field is wide open. I have not had the opportunity. I think I've heard the names rolling around. I was actually at, as I mentioned earlier, I was at a event yesterday at Fordham University of Law where they had several candidates. And we were talking on the issue of progressive district attorneys. And absolutely, Oscar, you just said it. I had an opportunity to meet Eric Gonzalez and his office and that staff in what he's putting forth. And Cy Vance, I would think probably in the last 10 years, I would say. And I'm going to say this in regards to what you said, Oscar, it's something you said earlier. I think sometimes politicians move with the tide of the waters. I kind of sense that's from Cy Vance's office. Do I hold it against? What I care more about is the progress that's happening on behalf of those individuals who have been discriminatorily impacted by our justice system. But going back to something you said about the legalization of marijuana, you also have to, there was a New York Times report that stated, if you want to the fastest way to get arrested for marijuana in New York State, New York City, is to be black and brown.
Right.
There you go.
That's the New York Times. And this was under Cy Vance's administration. Now, has he taken a step back? Has to have the winds of times brought him into a place he's not running. He acknowledged he would not be running this round. So that floor is open. And I had an opportunity to actually participate in a few of the programs that were endorsed through his offices, led by Lucy Lang, who's a dear friend of mine and very progressive. There was a program where Cy Vance, they developed a program where these district attorneys went into the prisons to develop relationships with the inmates there, the guys who were incarcerated, to develop policy. And that policy was then brought back and began to be introduced into how and what prosecutions should look like within the district attorney's office. Now, on another note, I have to say, the meeting, the webinar yesterday also brought another aspect of not only what we're seeing in the course and how justice is being decimated and done this. Another conversation that some of those district attorneys were discussing was the lack of diversity within the those offices of the district attorney, because historically, for Black and brown communities, the DA's office has not been our friends,
particularly in Manhattan.
Particularly in Manhattan. And these minority attorneys were sharing how they were conflicted with the idea of what justice was and looking at a particular case, Oscar, as opposed to the office of the policy as to how they would move forward in litigating or addressing certain cases. I also learned that when we start thinking about the prosecutor's office, Heather, one of the things we understand at the front lines of the power when it comes to the criminal justice system, that to me, in my opinion, is the law enforcement in the district attorney's office.
Yes.
Because it's there that either a case is tried through this cultural vein of incarceration, if you're, this, or even at the initial arrest and, where we have the lack of discretionary policing, but that's a whole nother bag of wax. Cause that's scary. That sometimes to me, that's like a blessing and a curse, Oscar, to give officers discretion. So let me say that, but also what we can see what's happening within our district attorney's offices. And I'm glad you mentioned Krasner in Philly, because he's a representation of, I think, that a new movement away from what we're seeing when we talk about equity and equality within our justice system. But I think, as Oscar highlighted, Manhattan's race is open. And I think that we're at a point in history where that individual who's elected into that office cannot come from that old-fashioned hardline approach anymore. Society, we're not structured for that anymore.
No, and it's important what Heather said, though, because the election, these votes, and that's why it's so critical, these voting laws that they're trying to pass across the country, and they were trying to pass the National Voting Rights Act again, which I can't believe we have to have an argument about. But who we elect does matter. And look, for example, let's go to
Georgia.
Brooklyn for Georgia, of course, but look at Brooklyn DA. When Ken Thompson was running, I said to him, "You would be the first DA elected on a policy of giving more rights to the criminal defendant." And I said, no politician, never mind DA, has ever been elected saying, "I intend to give a break to the accused and the people who are convicted." It was a watershed election, okay, and it changed prosecutors' office across the country. One man putting his money where his mouth is, because then what he did was he started a conviction review unit. But you know what he did? He put $1 million into it. He put 10 DAs. He put his 10 best young progressive DAs in it. He put investigators. He gave them a new suite of offices. He didn't just, sprinkle a little, water on the lawn. He fully funded it, and he was committed to it, and he's exonerated more people than any other DA's office, in the country.
And one of the problems that we had in New York and with the right and across the country, let me be frank. One of the things Ken Thomas said, and you just said it, this was never a get out of free. Every time we talk about equity, you're right, exactly. Anytime you talk about equity and equality within our criminal justice system, somehow the right turns out is the get out of free card. What Ken Thomas was trying to introduce was equity and equality within our criminal justice system. But to the right and to our proponents, what that sounds like, oh, this is to get out of free jail card. However, when we can look, and I don't mean to divert from this, but when we start thinking about what equity and equality looks to Black and brown communities, all we have to do is look at to the college scandal with Lori Loughlin. And, you know, there was a lady in Texas who falsified her records on her son's address so he could get in a good school.
Right. Yep. She used her father's address, correct?
Yes, the father's. That lady got 7 years in a Texas prison. Lori Loughlin, we had a national attention of the college scamming. I saw her and I sat in my screen like this when I'm looking at that, and I was just dumbfounded when they say they sentenced her to 60 days of hard labor in the federal prison, and I just. I didn't know where that came. So no. You get it. So when we start thinking about voting in America, when we start, and not just in America, but even when we start thinking at the local, it's critically important that our communities understand there's more to what happens than just our mayoral race or the governor's race, etc. Those roles for our students in the community, those are people who sign in the laws. We need to understand who those district attorneys are, who those city councilmen, who those individuals those are the players in the game.
Right.
That's local.
County legislators.
Local politics is going to impact your daily life far more than national politics will. Mm-hmm. And it's where you start. It's where people start. It's where we get our leaders. You know, like you said, they're not supposed to sniff the air. They're supposed to lead. We don't elect followers. We elect leaders. The word leader has to mean something. Mm-hmm. It means you come up with the idea and you bring people along with you because it's a good idea. Mm-hmm. Not that you say, "Oh, gee, that's what Clinton was doing." He was, following.
He was bending under pressure.
Right. Say, I'm going to put this to the side because I want to win. I want my party to win. You know, we need people like D.A. Thompson, and I think Eric Gonzalez has done a very good job trying to keep that going there. Including just yesterday dismissing 900 warrants for prostitution cases, saying we're not going to charge sex workers anymore because we know that they're human trafficked and these are quality of life, low-level crimes. You know, he had stopped prosecuting marijuana 2 years ago. You know, he had started getting rid of old warrants, and we all know warrants were an easy way for cops to get probable cause to pick somebody up. Next thing you know, you're charged with something else.
Right, the cycle starts over again.
This is all the same thing on a national level. It's the people we choose, it's the choices that they make on how to exercise their power. Exactly. So a DA can make different choices. And, communities of color are victims of crime. We don't want to defund, we don't want to get rid of the police. We want the police to stop getting our kids off the street for putting a cigarette out in a public park or something. That's what we want. Yes, we still want you to stop that jackass who's shooting at my grandmother.
Right.
I want him arrested. I don't want him. I'm not here to protect that. It's the choices that we want our folks to make. There's always enough money. Look at this budget. Everybody's talking about. Nobody thinks about the military budget this way. It's only when we want to use that money to help the poor that we start saying we're spending too much money. Mm-hmm. We have, the country. A statistic I always like to give is. The United States has the largest air force in the world. It also has the third largest air force in the world. It also has the fourth largest air force in the world. Because the Air Force is the largest, the Navy is the third, and the Marines are the fourth. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's money. Okay, it's how you choose to allocate it. That's what our leaders are supposed to do. Make the choices that have the best impact for the most people.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that's what DA is the most important right there, because that decides how we're going to treat people when they get caught up in the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. And because I'm telling you, especially for my community, or a lot of them are undocumented, getting picked up for that, marijuana meant you were deported back to Honduras, where you didn't see it for 20 years. Now you're going back to a country you have no connection to. Okay, so they would have disparate impacts, and that's what we're talking about. then privileged people who get caught up in the criminal justice system are not even as impacted as much as communities of color are. So we need the DAs and the police to make choices for those communities in the right way. I think that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that I not to cut you off, Heather, but one of the things I'm also concerned about, Oscar, are those political promises. And I'm speaking on behalf of communities who hear, and historically, Black and brown communities have always gotten the promises from politicians. We've always got we're going to make things better and things are going to be, and we're going to. So within Black and brown communities across, there is still that sense of distrust. Let me say that. Although we see that we're making steps forward, overall, we have politicians who come to our communities. We hear we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And for those communities, their voices and their promises just come that clanging thing because we've heard it before. So
we've been let down a lot.
Yes, a whole lot. So I think that, again, where we're at, I think that because of the social societal shift that's taking place, I think that more politicians that are coming forth at this point are being held to the fire more so by individuals such as yourself and myself and Heather. It's just that place we're in. And I did want to go back particularly to a statement that was made, and this is where Ken Thomas comes back in, because it was there under Ken Thompson, where if we would have talked about intervention or this conversation as for a prosecutor to talk about intervention programs 20 years ago, that would have been professional suicide. It was unheard of. So this is what makes Ken Thompson's approach at the time he did so paramount, because for other offices, and this was across the country, not just here in New York. This was a trend across the country. It was political and professional suicide. So that's what makes his who he was in the scope of when we talk about progressive district attorney's office. This is what makes him so profound, because he did it at a time. It was probably the most unpopular decision for an individual to talk about bringing equity and equality, because that means you're just going to let them all out the jails free and all this stuff. And there was something else, Oscar, you said that just really got me honed in, and I'll follow because old age is catching up with me. So it comes and it goes. So we'll just roll with it as it comes.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So what I'd like to impart to our audience is the importance of local voting and really looking at and interviewing these individuals who are meant to represent us, and really scrutinize, we're paying their salary. We are giving them this power. The power comes from the people. It's not the reverse. It's not a trickle down effect. We build them up to the top, all the way to the top. So if we start local and we really pay attention to their voting track records and, see what they're saying, and compare that with their actions. Do they match up? Do they line up? And either way they go, does that represent you, your family, your neighbors? Because you're giving this to them. And I really want to encourage everybody on any level, on every socioeconomic level, to get out, see who's supposed to be representing you.
Yes, and Heather,
that's the term, right? They're our representatives.
Exactly.
Yes.
But it's also important, Heather, that and then take a chance and maybe run yourself, even if you don't win. You don't need to win. You need to be there to ask the questions and to bring up the points. Here's a perfect example. Elizabeth Warren at that debate. Michael Bloomberg said, "I'm going to be president," right? I'm going to run for president. And all of a sudden, everybody was like, "Oh, yes, let's get another billionaire to save the country." And it took 30 seconds for Elizabeth Warren, who knew her stuff, and knew the facts and shot him down like a little boy.
Right.
Like, listen, you know, what are you talking about? Where are you coming from? So even if you don't win, I mean, and by the way, look at how much Elizabeth Warren has impacted the Biden administration. A lot of her people are in there. That's why he's left. He's left because a lot of the people that they're going to her and her committee and saying, who should we put here? Who should we put there? So you could impact the race without winning by bringing the conversation to other things. So when someone comes out, you can call their BS out on it.
Yes.
You could say, well, why did you do this? So I encourage people from the community board. That's a great place to start. Your school boards, your local city council race. You'd be surprised that, you know, that it doesn't take that much maybe to win even sometimes, because people don't expect you to run.
Right.
You know, they think it's going to be handed to them.
Yeah,
but you got to be in it to win it, right?
Yeah, but Oscar, you just said sometimes it's the idea of your presence is a representation of the issue. And that's a critical point, what Oscar just raised for those individuals in our communities. The people from these communities represent an issue. They represent pain. They represent, and when a person, and like also, if they may not be able to win, but that support will be going around that individual to the victor goes the spoils, but that creates the leverage for
and then the next time maybe you go a little further,
right?
You know, and maybe now all of a sudden, you know, you've got folks behind you, and you get some support, or at least the idea gets discussed. Yes, and you know, your issue is brought to the table. There's lots of benefit from it, you know.
Right.
So community involvement is key.
Right, and we didn't know when it came to the presidential election. Although I voted for Hillary and the Biden, you know, the one person that was Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, in his own way, forced Republicans and Democrats to look at issues that otherwise even the Democrats would have preferred not to. But they had no choice because he identified with it. Now, if you want to try to label it socialist, communism, you can do what you want. For those people who are impacted, they're not putting a label on it. What they're talking about are the issues. It's what we try to do with politicians. And this is something I think Oscar would agree. For those individuals who choose to run, you run on the issues, because they're going to try to label you if it doesn't fit with the status quo. And you know what? You know, I looked at, let me say this, in the line of criminal justice reform, and God, I can't believe, Oscar, you got me going on this crap. I was going you realize in the 2016 presidential election, Hillary Clinton spoke about the impact and the disparities of the criminal justice system. Hillary Clinton had Bill Clinton come to the NAACP and say, you know, the 94 crime bill, it was wrong. That's what we said, you know, these individuals. Right. Hillary Clinton ran on that to the Black communities. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And we all sat, and it was almost hopeful. As soon as the election was over, I didn't hear anything about the criminal justice system and reform from Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, let me tell you who I did hear. I still heard Bernie Sanders didn't give a hoot if he won. I didn't think Bernie Sanders still cared about, and this is why people love him so much. So I think a lot of those individuals who may be running outside of also AOC, I love her. Bernie Sanders set a template on what you just described.
100%. Especially when you think about it, look at his career, right? He started being involved locally, became mayor of a small town in Vermont. Exactly. Okay, so, you know, you wouldn't have predicted back then when he ran as a socialist that he'd ever be a serious candidate for president of the United States. But you know why? Number one, the guy, he was consistent. He was real. He was genuine. He was trying to bring people to where he wasn't trying to go to where people were. And he was not just consistent over the decades, but he was genuine. And more importantly, he had the stuff. he could tell you why. He could call out the BS and say, well, wait a minute, don't tell me there's no money for it. We just spent, X dollars for this that we can't even use. We don't even fight wars like that anymore. But you want to keep a plant open in Kansas, so stop. So it's a combination of being consistent, being prepared, being knowledgeable, but having good ideas. And I agree with you. Bernie, is a person of national impact that we owe a lot to pulling the country to the right way. And he's someone that we should definitely admire. And you're right. I love that point. That even after he lost, he didn't stop. He took. I think the day after he was with Joe. Okay, bro, you gonna do this? I mean, and he's still.
We're still because the issues of the people was matter, and when we're able to see that, that's that genuineness that Oscar talked about. It's not about the seat or the party. It's about the people. And Heather, you just made that point. It's the people, and one of the things in educating my students. It's very important that we help them understand how the game got twisted. Somehow we forget the powers in the people. We elect you. We pay your salary. You, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that far too long we've kind of got into this lethargic way with our politicians that somehow we give them the banner and and we hope that they bless us, right, Oscar?
And accept the breadcrumbs.
Exactly. Right.
Exactly. And that is the conversation during these election seasons that need to change. It's going to be important that individuals such as yourself and James, during these election cycles, that we're right there in the middle. We don't want to wait till no 4-year election for a presidency or for the governorship. We want them right there in those city councilman races. We want them right there doing those congressional elections. That's every 2 years, and we don't hear nothing about it, and not knowing that those individuals are being elected sometimes just winning with 5 votes because no one knew about it anyway. So
that's it.
Exactly.
Not knowing that is the individual.
Right. And now we need to, not only when we elect them, we need to stay on them so that we need to be their managers and their bosses, because that's who we are. They are representing the people. Everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, that's too broad, but I hear individuals saying the government this, the government that. And it puts a knot in my stomach and I want to scream. We are the government.
Exactly.
We are the people. And every DA that gets before a judge to prosecute someone and it says the people of, that's us, buddy. That's us.
We have to remind people who the people are. We are the people that they're talking about.
If it doesn't resonate with us, it's a no-go, and they need to go.
Exactly.
They need to know that. They need to know that.
Right.
They need to be
Put
reminded
pressure
of
on
it.
them.
And you can prepare. And it doesn't even take that much. It's a fair point, Heather. That if you were to get 100 people to call a DA about an issue, they're going to say, "What the hell is going on?"
Right.
Okay.
Make some noise.
You're going to show up at a debate. Submit questions, ask questions, get involved. It doesn't take that much. I go back to AOC, who ran a race that she was told that she would never win. Okay, and she won it by knocking on doors.
Yes.
Okay. She won it by having ideas, by knowing who she represents, and by knowing that these people got nothing from Joe Crowley, who'd been there forever just because he could. Okay.
Right.
And and you got to wake people up. And she beat the pants off of them. And then, she won the last election by even a larger margin. And again, and by the way, she's on it. She's consistent. She said, yes, I support the Biden-Harris administration. But guess what? This relief bill wasn't enough. She didn't hide behind it. She said, no, we wanted $2,000. We don't want $1,400. And she still voted for it.
Right.
But she voice note saying, I feel this isn't enough. It's a start. I'm going to push for more. That's how we should be. We don't have to agree, lock and step. Okay. And we just keep the issues up in their face. We need to keep the issues up in their face.
Exactly.
So
That's just
And lastly, and I think, and Oscar, and I want to say that, and this is why I make it very clear. Do I have slights? You know, did I support the current administration? Yes. Do I still have issues? Like a family. We're still a family, but we got some issues we need to work out. And in that area, particularly for me and the those I represent, that's the issue that we're still going to continue to have to address with the 94 crime bill. And this is why I'll be heading up a national campaign for the repeal of the 94 crime bill.
Beautiful.
I'm going to leave that there. And I still support that Biden-Harris administration.
All right. So I want to thank you, gentlemen, Terrence and Oscar, for this really inspiring conversation. And I invite our audience to leave comments. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If we can address them in a future episode, we will. And I'm looking forward to the next conversation. Thank you again. I'm Heather Trentacosta, and this is Pros and Cons.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.